Thanks for tuning in to Proline TV, the Ourlads Football Network, as we talk 2026 NFL offseason. We preview free agency and the NFL draft, and we are going to talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And that means James Yarcho is with us from the LockedOnBucs Podcast. And James, good to have you with us. Unfortunately, didn't want to have to talk to you this soon. But it is what it is. How's it going?
Oh, it's going well. Yeah, it's a little earlier than it has been over the course of the last 5 years talking about the Buccaneers offseason. But, you know, that's what happens when you lose 7 out of your last 9, when you go from being in the conversation among Super Bowl favorites to missing the playoffs, because of your former offensive coordinator winning the division with his new team. So, it definitely is going to make for an interesting offseason. I'll say that.
Do you think most Tampa Bay fans were rooting for Carolina?
No,
Okay.
no. I think that in their heart of hearts, they wanted the Bucs to win, but I think a lot of them were so discouraged and disheveled on how that season finished that they weren't going to be upset if Carolina won that last game. I mean, they weren't upset when Atlanta won the next day and clinched the division for the Panthers. I think they were upset that Todd Bowles ended up being retained. But, I understand it, but I don't understand it. Like, I really see both sides of that argument.
Well, okay. Then how about the game last week, seeing Carolina in the playoffs and how well they played and almost at the Rams? Do you think most Buck fans at that point were proud of the Panthers because they represented the NFC South?
No, the NFC South doesn't really have that like SEC vibe where it's, SEC versus everybody, or you start rooting for the division because they represent the division. Most fans wanted the Panthers to lose. And I think the frustrating part for Bucs fans was watching how well they played and having a lead going into the final 2 minutes of the game. And they're sitting there thinking the Bucs would have lost by 30. Like, the Rams would have absolutely decimated this Tampa team. How are the Panthers sticking around and have a chance at an upset? And I think that also spilled over into the frustrations of, why did we keep Todd Bowles? Why are we going to stick with this same defense that we know Matthew Stafford would have carved up? Whether or not his index finger was hurt, he still would have probably thrown for 350 and 3 touchdowns, just like he did on that primetime game.
Okay, so let's get to Bowles then, because I understand both sides. Because on one end, you could look at it as, well, ever since he's been head coach, they've won division titles, and he loses one division title by one game, and you want to get rid of him already? I mean, can he have a mulligan? On the other side, I understand, because, getting to the playoffs and all that, that's important. I mean, just take a look at Mike Tomlin, though. I mean, Mike Tomlin's got a Super Bowl and a much better resume, and Steeler fans wanted him out. And maybe justifiably so as well, because at some point, you want to just move on. If Tomlin had been there for so long, Walls hasn't had that sort of tenure, but still, now in today's day and age, if you're a head coach for 4 or 5 years, it feels like, the old days of 10 or 15 years. It's like, let's get going here. What's going to happen? So what was the specific reason, though, for wanting to move on from Bowles? Was it his being a head coach, or the fact that he really oversaw a defense that the fans are just sick of?
I think a lot of it had to do with, you have a head coach that's in charge of one side of the ball, and that side performed worse than the other side of the ball, which is the side that dealt with the vast majority of the injuries. That was statistically the worst defense that Todd Bowles has overseen since arriving in Tampa. It was the fewest amount of sacks that they had ever had. They were, allowing more explosive plays in one game against the Patriots than they had allowed the previous 2 seasons combined. All of that stuff started to snowball and add up. And then you start to look at the things that had gone wrong consistently throughout his tenure of head coach, right? It was the clock management. It was the in-game decisions. It was, all of the little things that you can overlook, or you criticize in the moment or immediately after the game, but by the next week, you've already moved on. You couldn't move on from the performance of the defense this year because it just continued to get worse and worse by the week. And one of the points that I made on Locked On Bucs was, I understand that Todd Bowles has won the division every year that he's been head coach up until now, but he also has 50% of his seasons where the Bucs finished below 500. There was only one other NFC South team to finish above 500 over the course of those 4 years, and that was the New Orleans Saints, who finished 9-8. So it's not like you've had huge competition. You've been able to take advantage of a very, very weak division, and you've been able to win it with 9 wins or 10 wins when this was coming into the season. This was an offense that should have been top 5. This was a defense that should have been top 10, and instead they regressed in every major metric that you could look at, from rushing defense to third down conversion rate to goal to go efficiency. Every metric that you could use, that was the worst defense that Todd Bowles had called. And I think fans were kind of fed up. You have a franchise that fired Tony Dungy for far less than what you saw out of Todd Bowles. And I can't think of another head coach to lose 7 out of 9 games down the stretch of a season when you were talked about among the favorites for the Super Bowl, and then was able to keep his job at the end of the year.
Do you attribute the collapse more so just based on the defense, or was there more going on?
The offense definitely has their fair share of the blame. Baker Mayfield did not play well. He was playing through a lot of injuries. He was on the injury report. I think it was 13 weeks with 8 different injuries. So he was playing through a lot. He was not himself. You had Emeka Egbuka, who was, easily the rookie of the year up until the bye week. You get on the other side of the bye week, and now all of a sudden he leads the NFL in uncatchable targets, whereas Mike Evans was getting catchable targets. Chris Godwin, Jalen McMillan, after being out for as long as he was getting catchable targets. It seemed like Baker just could not figure out how to throw the ball to Emeka Egbuka anymore, and that was certainly frustrating. You had 9 different offensive line combinations throughout the season. That's not going to go very well in terms of continuity, in terms of protection. So, the offense is certainly to blame in some of these situations, but you have a Thursday night collapse against the Atlanta Falcons where you're up by multiple scores and the defense just implodes on themselves. You had situations where the defense needed to get one stop, and they couldn't figure out how to do it. And while there were solid individual performances, the defense as a whole just wasn't working. It just seemed like Todd Bowles was figured out, and teams were able to attack their weaknesses with ease. And a lot of those weaknesses came in the middle of the field, whether it was tight ends being able to get open, if it was running backs out of the backfield that were able to get 10, 15, 20 yards after catch on any given play. So, the offense certainly isn't blameless. That's why Josh Grizzard ends up getting fired. But I think that was also the frustration of, okay, Grizzard has more reasons why he should have struggled compared to somebody who has been in this league and has run as many successful defenses as Todd Bowles. And Todd Bowles is the one that got to stay.
Yeah, when we talked before the season, just before, one of the things that was a glaring weakness, at least it looked like on paper, was the pass rush. And not that got any better, but we mentioned some of those injuries. So do you think then, because I'm trying to look at it both sides, I'm trying to look at personnel, and can you see that? Tell me whether I'm right or wrong. Was the personnel similar to the personnel from the past few years where the defense had been better? Or, there was a personnel issue this year on top of maybe some of the other problems that you brought up on the defensive side. Where do you put the blame more on, the scheme or personnel?
I would put it a little bit more on personnel. I do think it's obviously a combination of the two. But Hassan Reddick, that free agent signing didn't go the way that they had hoped. They were of the belief that Hassan Reddick was going to be able to come in and be the guy that he was for the Eagles. You kind of chalked the Jets year up to being, a one-off.
Yeah.
He was the guy that was supposed to come in and really anchor this pass rush. Yaya Diaby did a fine job, but Yaya Diaby is a Robin. He is not a Batman. He is the Scottie Pippen to whoever the Michael Jordan of this pass rush needs to be, and that was not Hassan Reddick. Now, to Reddick's credit, the pass rush was better when he was on the field, but he did miss time due to injuries. He was in and out of the lineup a couple of times. But you lose Kalijah Cansey again. And you lost him in week 2 to a torn pec. That certainly affected what they were able to do defensively. You had Elijah Roberts, who stepped up and played really well for a day 3 rookie who was thrust into a position where he was taking far more snaps than they had anticipated coming into the year. But when you don't have the horses to be able to do what you want to do, you have to find other ways to get the job done. And I think early in the year, Bowles was able to do that, but it never changed. And so once teams got that on film and were able to see, okay, how are you compensating for Kalijah Cansey being out? How are you compensating for Hassan Reddick being out? They never changed, and they were easily being figured out and schemed against. And there were no adjustments over the course of that period. And I realized the defense is the defense, but the best coordinators and the best head coaches are able to figure out ways to overcome these injuries. And I mean, look at the San Francisco 49ers. That's a perfect example. They have just as many, if not more, injuries to their team that the Bucs dealt with, and they are still competing in the playoffs. And that's a team that the Buccaneers beat when they were good in the first half of the season. So, I think that's also where the frustration lies with the organization, with the ownership deciding to keep Todd Bowles, because you look around the league and other teams were able to do it and the Bucs were not.
Do you think over the course of his history as a head coach there that did you notice going into the season, at least, that he had improved as a leader, as a head coach, that you could believe that the Bucs could win a Super Bowl with him at the helm? What was that feeling then, and how much did it change over the course of the season?
Yeah, I did have a belief in Todd Bowles to be able to lead this team, because you had seen the growth, right? You had seen him go from 8 wins to 9 wins to 10 wins. You had seen the offense get better, despite the fact that they were having to find a new offensive coordinator every single year. So there was that belief that this team is heading in the right direction under Todd Bowles. The problem then became that second half of the season where they were losing all these games and there was no adjusting. And you had Todd Bowles basically blaming the players for all of this, saying, in a roundabout way, going, it's not me, it's not my scheme, they have to do what I tell them to do. And that just wasn't the case. You have to be able to put your players in the best position to succeed, and they just were not doing that on a week-to-week basis. And I realized that you can't bat 1,000 when you have to find a new offensive coordinator every year. Bowles hit a home run with Dave Canales. He hit a home run with Liam Cohen. He struck out with Josh Grizzard. And again, that's not totally on Grizz. It might have been a little too much, a little too fast for him. It was, again, the injuries that he was dealing with and missing a lot of pieces. But as they got healthier, the offense got worse. And I think that's really what was the final nail in Grizz's coffin this offseason. So I don't think I have the belief that Todd Bowles could be the person to lead this team to a Super Bowl anymore. That can obviously change, based on who they get in the offseason. If he gets some of the pieces that I think are lacking on the defensive side of the ball, then it starts to look a little bit more like the personnel that they had in 2020, 2021 on defense. I might be able to be convinced to change my tune.
Yeah, that offense, I tell you, that was the mystifying deal. Was, okay, almost everybody's back, and that should be good enough. And I think the thing that really, because you would hope that the offense would be back and they put up enough points that they wouldn't really be in a close game late and they'd be fine. They'd win a few games. That's all they needed to do. They'd be in the playoffs. But they couldn't do that. And they would constantly be in a situation where it's a 4-quarter game. It's down to the last few minutes. And as you know, in the last 6 weeks or so of the season, they couldn't win any of those games. There's no confidence. There was a disconnect. And it was just so black and white to see that there's something going on, because it didn't make any sense looking at the roster with everyone back that the offense struggled as much as it did, except, of course, the only thing that I looked at was it's got to be either coaching or, Baker's definitely not right. And he could put up some good numbers every once in a while, but still, if he was healthier, they probably would have put up twice as much production as he's done. So, but I did look and blame on the outsider view. I had to blame the coaching staff because it made no sense.
Yeah, and Baker certainly was not anywhere close to 100%.
No.
Now, a 50% Baker is still better than a 100% Teddy Bridgewater, but that certainly played into it. I think the injuries that easily get overlooked, that really, really kind of torpedoed what this offense was going to be able to do, were Ben Bredeson, losing him after getting him back, and then Keeft. So with Ben Bredeson, you had already lost Cody Mauch for the entire year. Having the interior of the offensive line shuffled around so much, number one, it stunted the growth of Graham Barton. Like, he should have been better than he was his rookie season. He was worse. And it was because the guys on either side of him were not good offensive linemen. Like, there's no other way to put it. No disrespect to them. But, when those are the guys that are forced with protecting the interior of the offensive line, preventing that pressure from getting to Baker, preventing the pocket from collapsing, they failed. And so Baker's internal clock gets sped up because he doesn't trust his interior offensive line. And you could overcome Mauch a little bit as long as you had Bredeson there. As soon as you lost Bredeson, now you're having practice squad guys as starting offensive linemen, and it was just never going to work. And then Keeft, the role that he plays as a tight end, he's blocking. I think he has less than 5 targets in his career because he is a blocking tight end. Yeah. He's essentially a hybrid tight end fullback, and he's the guy that can clear these lanes and spring Bucky for big gains, spring Rashad for big gains. And losing him was a devastating blow that they didn't have a guy on the roster that could replicate that. I love Cade Otton. I love Payne Durham and Devin Culp, but none of those guys are the blockers that Keeft is, especially not in the situations where they're asking him to block and how they're asking him to block. So you lose a key component like Keeft, and it really does affect what you're able to do offensively. So those things piled on top of one another. Tristan Wirfs missing the beginning of the year, coming back and then missing time again with the turf toe, and I think he missed a game with a knee injury. You're losing all of these guys who together last year were a top 5 offensive line in the NFL. That was a big talking point that we discussed on this show. They were one of, I believe, 2 offensive lines in the entire NFL that were coming back intact from the 2024 season. And that was supposed to be huge. Instead, everybody keeps getting hurt, and you're having to piecemeal this thing together. And it just simply affected what Josh Grizzard was able to do offensively, how Baker was able to perform, and kind of destroyed everything.
Okay, let's stick with the offense as far as you mentioned Grizzard. So he's out. And look, I think I even mentioned this when we were talking about college football with the Ohio job. And it does seem like that third replacement is always the toughest, because anytime you get really fortunate with the first 2, whether it be like I was mentioning on another show, how Ohio was able to go from Solich, and then you're able to keep the winning going, and then you get to the third coach. I don't think that's going to work, because it can't keep working like that. That's not how it's not that easy. And that's what happened with the Bucs, is that it just caught up to them. 2 home run hires at that position of coaches, head coaches coaching in the playoffs this season. You just don't get a third one. It just doesn't work that way. And I'm not even sure how easy it's to be to just go and get 3 out of 4, but at least there's a better percentage that'll work. So what's the word right now as far as are you hearing anything at all? Is it way too early? Is there a particular type of coach out there that you think the team needs? What have you heard?
So I do think it's a little too early to try to predict who the offensive coordinator is going to be. Todd Monken is interviewing in the building on Wednesday for that vacancy. I still think they're going to schedule something with Mike McDaniel, who is, of course, a brilliant young offensive mind. He's also getting attention for a head coaching job, so you're not really sure which direction he is going to go in. The Bucs do have other interviews scheduled throughout the week, so it would seem unlikely that Todd Monken would get hired, even though he is in the building. And that's a guy that was the offensive coordinator and wide receivers coach for the Bucs during Dirk Cutter's era. Now, he was the offensive coordinator running Dirk Cutter's offense, but he's been in the building before. He was interviewed, in the process when the Bucs hired Dave Canales. Todd Monken was in the mix. He chose to go to Baltimore. The Bucs end up hiring Dave Canales, and you can point to the fact that during that interview cycle, Todd Monken had an option because the Bucs, did want him. They were incredibly interested in bringing him in. Well, you're now in the post-Brady era. You are trying to get out from all of the void years of all these contracts. So you're strapped for cash, and you didn't really know which Baker Mayfield the Bucs had signed. And he was in a quarterback competition with Kyle Trask. And Monken's looking at the Ravens where he's going, well, I can have an MVP at quarterback. That's obviously the choice that I should probably make. Now he knows what kind of quarterback Baker Mayfield can be. He's seen what Baker's been able to do the last couple of years. And it's probably a more attractive opening. You're also looking at the fact of, you have a defensive-minded head coach. He's going to leave you alone. You are the head coach of the offense. Yeah. He's not going to meddle. He's not going to get in the way. And I think that's going to be really intriguing for a lot of these offensive coordinator searches. I do think that they're going to shy away from kind of the Dave Canales level of offensive coordinator and look more for somebody that has experience calling plays. So Dave Canales, no experience. He worked out. Josh Grizzard, no experience. He didn't. Liam Cohen, even though he didn't have NFL play calling experience, did have play calling experience. And I think they're going to look for somebody that can do that. And obviously Todd Monken and Mike McDaniel are going to be at the very top of that list. You could go with, Zach Robinson is another one that I would consider a big splash hire. Quarterback situation is much better in Tampa than it was in Atlanta last year. Yep. The weapons overall are better in Tampa than they were in Atlanta. I mean, Bijan Robinson is arguably the best running back in the NFL. Bucky is not Bijan, but you take a look, if they bring Mike Evans back, who's about to enter free agency, and you have that, that foursome of receivers plus Tez Johnson, now you're really talking about what Zach Robinson would be able to do. So I think he's another big one. And then Nate Scheelhaus is a name that continuously comes up. He was interviewed for the offensive coordinator position in Tampa last year. He is starting to get a lot of buzz this year. He does have experience play calling, again, not in the NFL, but when he was at Iowa State, he did call plays, so he has an understanding of in-game management and adjustments, and that's going to be crucial for a guy like Todd Bowles, who was already really close to being fired. Now he's in a situation where he knows he could get fired. He's not going to want to take that risk and that chance on somebody who, while they might be a great offensive mind, he doesn't want them to go through the growing pains of the in-game situations underneath him. So I would say, in my personal opinion, Todd Monken is probably the favorite to land this job. I know there is very serious interest in wanting to bring him in, and for good reason. Mm-hmm. But I still say it's a little too early in the process to really nail down anything like that.
Yeah, it's a tricky situation. On one hand, the good thing is for any offensive coordinator is you get to work with one of the better quarterbacks in the league. On the negative side is stability. And how do I know this isn't going to be a 1-year deal? If things don't
on the
really
flip
go
side
well.
of that, though, if Todd Bowles is gone after this year, but the offense is performing the same way it did under Liam Cohen, now you're in a situation where you might be the head coach.
That's
It
true.
may be 1 year as an offensive coordinator, but then you might be the head coach in 2027. Because I think the Bucs have kind of learned from the Liam Cohen situation. And again, I understand the way Liam handled it was absolutely terrible. It was deplorable, but you also couldn't really fire a head coach that had gotten, more wins each and every year, was coming off of another division, just to take that chance. Now you see what Liam was able to do with the Jaguars, and a lot of Bucs fans are wondering what if. So I think the offensive coordinator position could be enticing, especially for a guy like Mike McDaniel, for example. When he looks at the head coaching landscape, does he want to go to a rebuild situation like the Titans? Does he want to go to a rebuild situation like the Browns? Or would he rather take an offensive coordinator job for a team like the Bucs, like the Lions, like the Eagles now, where it would parlay into a better head coaching opportunity next year?
And maybe, like you said, if it's someone like McDaniel, he might look at this as, well, if I do my job, I've got head coaching experience.
Mm-hmm.
I would probably be the head guy to get the gig, especially if they get off to a slow start, they decide, let's move on. It's very easy to just put McDaniel in the head spot at some point during the season, potentially give him an opportunity to be the man in 2027. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that will be a little bit of a draw.
Okay, so let's free agency, and let's get into it, because you mentioned Mike Evans, and the cap space is fine. I'm not sure. They're at about $24 million now. Is there any chance that you've seen on the books that they can have enough money to make some big splashes, or are they just going to have enough money to have the average type of offseason where they can maybe add a decent player or two?
They have to create the money to make big splashes. I think if you're going to sell this decision to keep Todd Bowles to the fan base, to the season ticket holders, you have to make splashes. Now, Jason Light does have Mike Greenberg there as his right-hand man, who is one of, if not the best in the business at figuring out how to manipulate the cap, how to create more space. So I think you're looking at a couple of restructures. You might be looking at some extensions where they can move some money around and kick the can down the road like they did during the Brady era. But this is a team that has to have a 2020 level offseason. And when I say that, I mean, that was the offseason that they brought in Tom Brady. They brought in Leonard Fournette. They brought in Rob Gronkowski. They brought in Antonio Brown. They brought in all of these guys, and it got you a Super Bowl. You have to have that level of impact. So you have to go out and you have to trade for a Max Crosby, or you have to sign a Trey Hendrickson. Like, those are going to be the two big names that are talked about incessantly when it comes to the Buccaneers. You have to go out there and you have to get Matt Milano or a Quay Walker or a Nakobe Dean to be a linebacker to replace Levante David, who I believe is going to retire. And you have to make those kinds of big splashes. You can't bargain hunt anymore. You struck gold with Shaq Barrett when you went bargain hunting for free agents. Now you can't take that risk. You can't play the Hassan Reddick game again this year. You have to have an alpha edge rusher. So when you're taking a look at these free agents, there's plenty of them for the Bucs that are going to be allowed to walk. I think Mike Evans is in a situation here where the Bucs are going to tell him, if you want to play, you come back. We'll figure out the money. We'll make it work. I don't think that Mike Evans is going to change teams in order to continue playing. I think the biggest opportunity for him to do that would have been when he was a free agent a couple of years ago. Houston was interested. The Rams were interested. The Chiefs were interested, and he opted to stay in Tampa. I think it's going to be a Levante David situation where, as Mike wants to play, he'll just continue to sign deals with the Buccaneers. But beyond that, there aren't a whole lot of guys that you can sit there and say, we have to bring this guy back. I think a lot of these guys are replaceable. whether that's in the draft or in free agency, because you're talking about primarily role players. You have a couple of starters mixed in there, but this is Mike Greenberg's time to shine. You have to create, another 20 to $40 million in cap space here with restructures, extensions, and some of these void years added on.
Are there any players that are still on the roster, contract, all that you think can be cut? Not just restructured, but actually let go?
I don't really see any right now. Jamel Dean was the big name that we talked about a couple of times on this show, that I felt was a cut candidate. And then he turns around and plays at an all-pro level for most of the year, but he had restructured and taken less money in order to become a free agent this year. He might stick around, but I think the guys under contract, there really aren't any of them that I would say, you know what, you can cut bait with that guy and you can move on. Instead, I would look more to the extend and restructure, because there really aren't too many guys there because this team is loaded with talent. You have to maximize it, and there aren't any glaring weaknesses that are easily replaceable.
All right, so you mentioned Dean, and do you think at his age, do you think that he's going to be able to command an amount that the Bucs won't want to match? Or do you think that both parties will probably come together at a mutual number?
I think they can get it figured out if they want to. Now, Benjamin Morrison, the rookie out of Notre Dame, second-round pick, he was in and out of the lineup. He had ups and downs, as most rookies do. But I do believe that they can look at him and say, look, he can be a starting outside corner for us.
Yes.
It could be him and Zion McCollum. Now, McCollum has to play a lot better. He took a massive step backwards compared to what he did in 2024. But I also know that Jamel Dean loves being in Tampa. He loves playing for this organization. He loves the community. He loves the fans. He might be willing to take a little bit less in order to stay, and then they can figure out how to work those three corners together, because you have your nickel in Jacob Parrish. So, it's going to be an interesting balancing act. Or would you rather allocate that kind of money to a linebacker, to an edge rusher, or maybe to a depth corner where you have your two starters in McCollum and Morrison, you have your nickel, and then you need to replace Kindle Vildor. You need to replace, Jamel Dean to an extent, but you've replaced him in the starting lineup. I think there's a path to him returning. I just don't know how high on the priority list it's going to be for the Bucs.
Okay. Then on offense, you mentioned Evans, and we also have two others. So we've got Rashad White, and Cade Otton. Now, Otton is the clear number one tight end. He's not at that elite level, but he seems to be one of these guys that is probably that next step level where, he's, again, from the outside perspective, he looks like he's a solid player in the league at that position. So do you think there's mutual interest there to return? And as far as White, with Tucker most likely coming back, being restricted at all, I got to believe that there's teams out there with running back issues that are going to go after someone like Rashad White.
Rashad's gone.
Yeah, I can't imagine even. He's gone. Yeah, I can't even imagine Rashad would be happy here anyway, because he's got the talent to be a number one running back.
Yeah, I've been saying since about September or October that Rashad White it's going to be his last season in Tampa, and he's going to be a Washington Commander. That is.
Why is that?
Well, I think he sees a situation there, and all due respect to Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, he sees a situation there where he can be the RB1.
Yeah.
He can be the lead back. He'd still be part of a committee to an extent, but he would be the lead back. Not to mention he and Jane Daniels are like best friends. So, and guys love to play for Dan Quinn. He is very much a player's coach. I think that is the obvious landing spot for Rashad. I'm sure other teams will get in the mix. Washington, he's not going to play there for free. The money has to work out. But I would say that is the most likely landing spot. Outside of that, plenty of other teams in the league would want a running back like Rashad. I just don't think that he will return to Tampa.
Sure. Cade?
As far as Cade Otton is concerned, I think it's probably about a 65-70% chance that he returns. The Bucs might look, depending on who the offensive coordinator is, of course, but they might look to see if they can land a big splash tight end on the open market. If you hire Zach Robinson and he has the opportunity to bring Kyle Pitts into this offense to add to Evans and Godwin and Mech and J-Mac, now you're really going to be on fire offensively. But Baker loves Cade Otton. Otton loves playing for this organization. He and Baker have a great connection. He's trusted in, major situations, third downs, goal to go situations. There is a connection and a chemistry there between the two of them. I think Baker's probably going to say, look, I want my guy back. So I could see, a 2-3 year deal for Cade Otton. But I'm sure Cade would also understand that they're also going to continue to look to upgrade that position, whether that's in free agency or the draft. But I would say that it's again, offensive coordinator will play a big part in it. If the offensive coordinator is Todd Monken, Isaiah Likely is going to be a free agent. He might want to bring Likely in, who could, he shined in that offense already. He was just kind of stuck doing a split time with Mark Andrews. So more than likely Cade Otton is back, but I'll be a little more convinced depending on who they hire to run the offense.
And as far as before we move on, again, do you think that we got who else? Deion Jones, Vildor, Hall, Gaines, any of those players worth bringing back?
I think they'll try to bring back Logan Hall. He has improved. Slow going for sure, but he has improved. He has made some impact plays. Greg Gaines is another guy that they love having in that rotation. So they might try to find some common ground there and bring him back again on a 1-year deal. I don't think anyone, is going to be devastated if either of those players walk. If Logan Hall walks, it hurts the team a little bit more than if Greg Gaines does, but you're already looking for defensive line help anyway. So, you're already looking to upgrade that position group. I could see one, if not both of them walking, just because the Bucs want to go in a different direction to try to revamp this pass rush altogether.
Okay. Now, are there any developing players on the team? But because we're going to get into the final part of this interview here is going to be maybe the most important. That's offseason team needs. Are there any players on this team who were either younger players who were either injured or they were part of last year's draft that will be a bigger part of the team in the next year or two that the outside fan may not be aware of?
I think a forgotten man is David Walker. He was the 4th round pick, edge rusher, tore his ACL during training camp. He missed the entire season. He is obviously going to have a role on this team. Chris Braswell just has not worked out. I think you're going to see David Walker become either the 3rd or 4th man in that rotation. Yaya Diaby is obviously a starter. Anthony Nelson is going to continue to be who he's been. They have to find that alpha guy, that Batman to Yaya's Robin. But David Walker is a guy that is certainly going to make an impact on this team. He was one of the best edge rushers in college football in 2024. That's why the Bucs took a chance on him. Being from a small school and dominating the way that he did, you have to see how that translates to the NFL because the competition is certainly tougher. But it's going to be really, really hard for him to do worse than Chris Braswell has done, as an edge rusher that came from Alabama and was a 2nd round pick. So, he is certainly a guy. And then again, I have to continue to give flowers to Elijah Roberts. A 5th round pick, was thrust into a position where it probably sped up his development. He was not supposed to take as many snaps as he did, and he continued to grow week to week. And you started to say, okay, this is a viable player on this defensive line in this scheme for the Bucs that is showing signs that he can get even better. So I think, if you lose Logan Hall, if you lose Gray Gaines, Elijah Roberts is already kind of there waiting in the wings for an opportunity to play even more. I am really confident at his growth. Outside of that, Sirasi Dennis is who he is. Like, you saw him as a full-time starter all season. He's not that guy. So he's a great depth piece. He's a great, first guy in off the sideline to give somebody a spell or to play a couple of snaps. But outside of that, you have what you have with this defense. The starters, by and large, are great, but now you have vacated 3 starting positions, and those need to be replaced, and then the depth needs to be replaced, which is where I look at the money that you could spend on Jamel Dean, or you could turn around and spend that on a corner that's a depth piece and a special teamer. You could spend it on a safety that is a backup and a special teamer. You can allocate that money probably a little more wisely to build up the depth rather than have a congested rotation of starting corners.
So this would definitely, at least, and again, you can never judge a draft this early, but it looks like it's going to wind up being a really good draft class, the 25 draft class, with Ibuka. Tej Johnson getting an opportunity to play early on. You mentioned Roberts and Walker. You also mentioned Morrison and Parrish. So really nothing to be critical at all regarding any of those players at this point. Is that the general consensus that this looks like it's going to be a really good class?
Yeah, of course. In Bucs fans' minds, hindsight is always 2020. Now they're back to being angry that the Bucs used a first-round pick on a wide receiver when the pass rush was so bad, the linebacker play wasn't good. But
they forget what happened early in the season when all the receivers were down, right?
Yeah, that's the argument I always make is, this team was talked about as, one of the top Super Bowl contenders. They were number 1 in the power rankings. Baker was getting MVP love, and it was because of Emeka Ibuka. So if it wasn't for him, now you're in a situation where the season was even worse. Maybe that's what Bucs fans would have preferred, because that gets you into the top 10, and maybe you can get, an edge rusher there in the top 10 of the draft. Instead, you're not probably going to get a game changer at that position, which is why you have to look out on the open market. But I think looking back, 3, 4, 5 years from now, we're going to look at 2025 as being one of Jason Light's better draft classes.
Any of these undrafted kids going to make an impact? You got you got 3 guys on offense and 2 on defense.
Not any more of an impact than they've already made.
Okay.
Those are typically your depth guys. Jason has been really, really good at finding undrafted talent. Sean Tucker was undrafted, but I think his role is what it is. He's not all of a sudden going to take over the Rachaad White role. So you're going to look to replace that, when Rachaad leaves in free agency. But beyond that, I think you're happy with the development, but these guys aren't going to come and take any starting jobs anytime soon.
Are the kickers set?
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody's happy with the kicking game. Got it.
Yeah, just not the special teams coordinator who got fired.
Okay. So that's another position of so overall the unit, the coverage unit, not so good, but the 2 kickers, fine.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. All right. Now let's get to team needs. And I've already got 2 just by speaking with you here. It's obvious that the number 1 need is going to be edge rusher. Is that correct?
100%. Yeah, you've got to find that guy. You have to find the Shaq Barrett that you had when Bowles was running one of the best defenses in the league. Like that's the player that you need, and it's going to take a lot of money. It might take some draft capital if you're going after Max Crosby, but I think one of the partial owners there in Vegas, as well as their GM, are pretty tight with the Buccaneers organization. Tom Brady and John Spytek, they're pretty familiar with Jason Light, and I think if Crosby is on the move, that's those relationships and that trust that you have are so important when it comes to these trade negotiations. If Jason calls John Spytek, I think he's going to listen. I think they're going to be able to figure something out. Outside of that, yeah, I mean, Trey Hendrickson, he's the big free agent that you could go after. It's a risk because he does have a pretty consistent injury history, but
and he's already 32.
Yeah, it's not going to be a long-term solution, but Todd Bowles isn't looking for long-term.
True.
This window for the Bucs is not going to stay open forever. You need 2 to 3 years out of Trey Hendrickson, and you can get that pretty easily. There are some options out there, but if you're talking about elite level edge rushers, they
don't come around very often.
No, they do not.
You got to draft them. And so, yeah, I mean, who knows? I mean, there might be a few, but the Chargers have enough money that they seem to have found a kid that didn't work out in Baltimore, the kid Owe, who looked really good. Maybe one of the, was one of the players that actually looked good in the Chargers Patriots playoff game. But for the most part, unless you find a young guy like that and develop them, maybe they just haven't hit it for whatever reason. Like in Baltimore, sometimes that happens. You go to somewhere else and everything clicks. Yeah, they're just not available. Look at the ages here. They're all basically the top guys are all in their 30s or have injury histories, and that's just not gonna work out for the long term. So that's why it does make sense if the Bucs go with an edge rusher in the draft. Okay, so I'm not saying it's going to be the number 2 need, but it does look like at some point the Bucs are going to have to concern themselves with some inside linebackers.
They need 2. Like that.
True.
That is the number 2 need, and you need 2 of them.
Okay.
As I said, I think Lavonte David is done. I think he's going to retire. You could visibly see that he didn't just lose 1 step. He lost almost 2 steps from 2024 to 2025. I think it's poetic that he finished his career with the Buccaneers tied with Derek Brooks for the most tackles in franchise history.
Wow.
That tells you the kind of level of player that he was.
That's crazy.
And, he should be a Hall of Famer, 100%. He'll get the Ring of Honor. He should be a Hall of Famer. But you also saw that Servassier Dennis is not starting level quality. So not only do you have to replace a legend in Lavonte David, but now you also have to find the other guy to line up next to him, which is why I think drafting it at 15, you're probably drafting an inside linebacker. You're not going to have that elite top tier edge rusher come to you at 15. You could get the best off ball linebacker at 15. So
True.
If you go out and you spend on Nakobe Dean, if the Packers let Quay Walker, test free agency, you bring in one of those guys, and then you can turn around and you can draft Sonny Styles out of Ohio State. All of a sudden, your biggest weakness on this defense, which was the middle of the field, becomes a huge strength. And I think that's probably the direction that they need to go in. You can take your shot on another, depth or rotational edge rusher in, later in the draft. I think you need to look to inside linebacker as far as who you're taking with your first round pick, because the best player at a position of need is going to be that off-ball linebacker.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Just taking a look at now this definitely will be updated soon. This was put together, I'm not sure exactly when, but it's not real recent, I believe, maybe a month ago. And taking a look there, you've got linebackers like Arvell Reese Arvell Reese is someone that is supposed to, people are looking at him as a top 5, top 10 draft pick. You got a few other guys there. And again, you take a look at edge. I think Ruben Bain. I mean, Ruben Bain is actually a player I want as a Jet fan.
Oh, for sure. Everybody wants Ruben Bain.
Yeah. So I think with the second pick with Mendoza going to the Raiders, I think the Jets are going to get what they want. So I know Jet fans, of course, we want quarterback, and I get that, but you're not getting a quarterback worth anything at 2 in this draft. So unless they're going to trade down, I feel pretty confident the Jets will get their guy. But yeah, this looks like a pretty good draft for edge rushers, though. So I think there's some pretty good depth here. I think there's an opportunity for them to get a pretty good player at 15.
Well, and we just know kind of how the beginning of this draft always goes. The quarterbacks, the edge rushers, and then those can't miss wide receivers. Those are going to be all we see. Maybe an offensive tackle or two.
A couple of corners. I know McCoy and Delane could go high. I mean, definitely Downs is going. Now, I know he's a safety. That's going to be the real interesting thing. It's going to be exactly how high can Downs go, because that's going to say a lot about how much has the draft really changed with safeties and where they get drafted. Because Caleb Downs, if this was 10 years ago, he'd be a top 5 pick cinch. Now it's like, will he get drafted that high? Because NFL teams just don't value safeties anymore.
And it's the same with Jeremiah Love. Like, and that's the guy. Bucs fans would be irate, but if Jeremiah Love fell to them at 15, I would take him without hesitation. He is a game-changing running back, and if you pair him with Bucky Irving,
that's a hell of a backfield.
It would be the most amazing duo of all time. However, it terrifies me that the most likely landing spots for Jeremiah Love would be either the Chiefs or the Saints. I don't want him added to the Chiefs offense, and I don't want the Bucs to have to face him twice a year. But again, because he's a running back, is he going to be valued where he should be valued? Like, to me, he should have been the Heisman Trophy winner. If you're talking about just the best player in college football, it was Jeremiah Love.
Yes.
But because he's a running back in the NFL, is he going to go top 10 where he should go? And I think that's kind of it's right there with Caleb. Is the player going to be valued where they should be despite what position they play?
Yep. Sadiq, he's clearly the number one guy. I think there'll be a big gap when it comes to where Sadiq will be picked. He'll probably be top 15. Can't imagine he'll go any higher than what we saw the last couple of years with some really good tight ends coming out. Maybe he gets later part of the top 10 is possible. So that's a player. You talked about the tight end position as well. So, edge rush, inside linebackers, Dose, number 3.
It's probably running back.
Really? Wow, that surprises me.
Just Why is because that? You have to replace what Rashad was in the offense. And while Sean Tucker is good, he does more of what Bucky did than what Rashad did. So with Rashad, he was a threat to run the ball, of course. He was the bigger threat as the pass catcher, and he was the pass protector. He was the guy that could really pick up the blitzes, sniff that out, and do a good job of buying Baker extra time. You have 2 running backs. You have 2 viable running backs on the offense. If you hire Mike McDaniel, if you hire Todd Monken, that's not going to cut it. You have to get a dude. Because if you're going to utilize Bucky Irving the way he was utilized in 2025, that guy's not going to make it to a second contract. He will be beaten up and out of the league. He's too small to handle that. And I think if you asked him personally, he would agree that kind of workload is not sustainable for him to have the kind of career that he wants to have. So he's probably looking for the Bucs to bring in another running back. Now, I don't think that means that the Bucs are going to draft one in the second round. As much as it may put a smile on my face, it doesn't mean that they're going to draft Jeremiah Love in the first. I think you're probably, again, looking at the earliest, a third round draft pick. Maybe it's a third round late pick where they're able to, they trade back and they pick up a late third or something to that effect. But you're looking at probably a day 3 running back selection, and they are going to put an emphasis on the player they select has to be the kind of running back in college that was picking up blitzes, that was able to read that and able to help in pass protection.
This is the guy.
And he's absolutely outstanding.
He's going to be a really good third down receiver, blocker. he's perfect because he'll be a second, third round pick as well. I think he'd be a perfect option for what you're looking for.
Yeah, and I think he might get drafted a little sooner than the Bucs would be willing to pull the trigger. But it's definitely a name that when I start diving into the draft needs on Locked On Bucs and I start breaking down a lot of these players, that's certainly a name that I'm going to bring up. And I really like Jadarian Price too. I love Notre Dame running backs, but I don't know if Price is the kind of back that the Bucs need.
Exactly.
So it's going to pain me to see him go somewhere else as well. But there are going to be some solid options for the Bucs. They're going to need a guy with a little bit more size than what Bucky has, and probably a little bit more speed than what Sean Tucker has. But pass blocking is going to be at the top of their list when they're looking for these guys.
Need number 4.
I'm going to go defensive line depth. So again, if you bring back Logan Hall, great. I think they should. I think they probably will. Then you have Vita, you have Kalijah Cansey. You need him to stay healthy. For the love of all things holy, Kalijah, can we get a full healthy season from you? And then you have Elijah Roberts, who stepped up in a big way. You still need more there. You're probably going to have to replace Gaines. Again, Gaines or Hall, maybe both. But you need somebody there that you can rotate in. I would say actually defensive line, interior offensive line depth are kind of mixed together. I realize they're very different positions, but you have to emphasize the depth and the rotation there along those offensive and defensive lines. Because what we saw, losing Robert Hainsey hurt the Bucs a lot. And I realized he felt he was worthy of starting. I agree. But you didn't replace him with anyone that was anywhere close to the caliber that he was. So I would put, defensive line depth, offensive line depth kind of tied there at the number 4 biggest need.
Oh, okay. So line depth overall. Okay. Yeah, because like you said, when those injuries exposed a big issue. And look, it's not the only way to remedy that is the draft. And what I mean by that is you can't go out in free agency and get a really good depth offensive lineman because they want to start, like you just mentioned, with Hainsey. So you have to go in the draft to get those guys. So I'm sure that's something that they'll do. Okay, so wrapping it up with the final pick, and I know it's not going to be receiver. So is it going to be the secondary?
Yeah, it's going to be a corner. Like I said, I think even though there's a path for Jamel Dean to return, I don't know that that's where the Bucs are going to allocate those funds. You have starters in McCollum and Morrison. You're going to need depth. Kendall Vildor, he was okay on special teams, but we're also talking about one of the worst special teams units that there were in terms of coverage. You need a guy that you can trust to come on the field in case of injury. Morrison in and out of the lineup with injuries all season. McCollum missed the end of the season because of injury. You need somebody that you can trust. So you need to go out and find a solid corner that can come in off the bench, that can play special teams, that essentially is going to replace Kendall Vildor in that rotation and to a certain extent replace Jamel Dean. Again, just like inside or off-ball linebacker, you're probably looking for at least 2 corners this offseason. You could draft one, you could sign
unless they sign Dean, then it's 1.
And unless they sign Dean. If they bring back Jamel Dean, you're looking for 1. I'm not sure that that's going to be the direction that they decide to go in. I mean, again, credit to Jamel Dean. He balled out for this team. He was playing at an all-pro level up until the final couple weeks of the season. But you definitely need at least 1, probably 2 corners, because your special teams coordinator is going to want better gunners. And then Bowles is going to want somebody more reliable than Kendall Vildor going out there and taking meaningful snaps on the defensive side.
Yeah. Matter of fact, just looking at this is a really good cornerback class. Even these top 10. So they're all.
And I'll throw one out there that probably would have been in the top 10 had he not missed almost his entire year. It's Xavier Scott you can see my block eye back here, from Illinois. Yeah, he was getting first round buzz, ends up missing almost the entire season with injury. Very similar to what Benjamin Morrison went through. He was getting first round buzz, misses his final year at Notre Dame because of the hip injury. So that's another one that's going to be a first round talent that you're going to be able to get on day 2. He's going to make some noise in the NFL. He's very, very similar to Devin Witherspoon and how he played at Illinois and what he's been doing in Seattle. So that is a name to keep in mind.
Okay, excellent. Great job as always, James. Matter of fact, I'm not the only one who believes so. Sean, thank you. Appreciate it. We try. And James is going to continue talking about the Bucks 5 days a week still, James?
5 days a week.
5 days a week on the Locked On Bucs podcast. We have links in the description of this video that you can check it out right now. I look forward to talking to James at some point. If something comes up before the draft, something important, we'll try to get James on for a few minutes to clarify, to update, whatever. If it's something really impactful, obviously you want to stay tuned and check out everything going on in the offseason, not just personnel-wise, but because, as we started off with, got to find out who the OC is going to be. So that's big news coming out real soon, a new special teams coach and all that. And then if we don't talk to James before the draft, we'll definitely talk to him after the draft and take a look back at how the offseason went for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So once again, James, I appreciate your time as always, and have a great couple of months if we don't talk.
All right. Thanks so much. Always enjoy being on.
All right. Thanks, James. That's James Yarcho. So again, 5 days a week, the Locked On Bucs podcast. And we are going to talk more Tampa Bay Bucs football this year before the season begins with James. I promise you that. More than likely, the hope is we'll get him on a couple more times after the draft and before the season begins, right around training camp and all that. So that's where you can check out James here on the Ourlads Football Network and also at Proline TV. We'll see you a little bit 3 o'clock live for our coverage at Don DeMarco's Pizzeria in Las Vegas. That is going to be where Jim Fice is going to be located. They're going to preview all the games this weekend in the NFL playoffs. And then I'll see you tomorrow at 3 o'clock Eastern with our Dallas Cowboys coverage with RJ Ochoa of Blogging the Boys. And before that, the Playbook ATS podcast at 1 o'clock with Mark Lawrence, Andy Isco, Jim Feist, and myself. We'll talk more about the NFL playoffs as well as college football and the national championship on Monday. So for James Yarcho, I am Greg DePalma. Thanks for tuning in here once again. We'll see you next time.